Hello, welcome to another Tweedy Pubs video. Today I am in Brighton. Brighton may not seem like an obvious venue for historic pub exploration, but it is actually a very well preserved, mostly Regency era, well, one time town and now city as part of Brighton and Hove. Originally a fishing village, grew in popularity as a result of the patronage of the Prince Regent in the early 1800s, and then continued to grow with the arrival of the train in the 1840s and became a fashionable seaside resort, especially for Londoners to escape the city and to bathe in the seaside for largely health reasons originally, but it became quite a haven for pubs at its peak. In the late Victorian period, there were as many as 800 licensed premises here, and many of them are well preserved. There are as many as a dozen on CAMRA's list of historic pub interiors, far better than any other coastal town or city I could find in southeast England. So that's why I'm in Brighton today. I'm not going to be able to get around the whole 12, but I'll see at least a handful of them and see what the city has to offer. First pub on today's itinerary, the Quadrant. Possibly some Lovicite pilasters on the outside and old signage, which may be late Victorian, early Edwardian. This is slightly contested by different sources I read, with Tom Bovey written across, who was the proprietor around the turn of the 20th century. And it is around the turn of the 20th century, circa 1900, that the current fittings in at least the lower bar area date to. I think the star feature here has to be that bar back, which probably dates to around 1900. There is some etched glass that acts as a screen to the staircase, and slightly rounded forms a little alcove seating area to one side of that lower bar. That's a particularly attractive feature, I thought. More etched glass panels by one of the doorways as well. The windows have quite Victorian looking curtains, probably not original, probably a later addition, and also what I believe to be sort of old gas lamp holders, this sort of bracketed brass work going across the windows there. That's also quite an attractive feature, although possibly not contemporary with that 1900 refit. It's quite an unusual name for a pub. I don't think I've ever encountered a pub called the Quadrant before. As far as I can tell, it takes its name from the short block of buildings that it forms part of, possibly mid 19th century, and at one time that would have been called the North Street Quadrant. I searched old newspapers to find some records of this pub and found quite an interesting tale of a balloonist and parachutist named Neil Campbell, who was lodging here in the 1890s. He appears in newspapers multiple times over the ensuing years, partly because of an ongoing court battle with his estranged wife, who he was neglecting and failing to pay her maintenance payments, but also because of a string of occasions when he failed to pay his hotel bill. Now, he was clearly a bit of a showman, quite an interesting character who put on public displays of ballooning followed by parachuting. He'd go up by balloon and then descend by parachute, and that led to a rather nasty accident in 1895 where I think it was either the balloon or the parachute was snagged on the chimney of a house. He then hit the roof, quite literally, fell to the ground, fractured his skull, amazingly survived, and although possibly he then put his days of showmanship behind him, was no longer doing those great public displays of ballooning and parachuting, he instead spent his time quietly devising a flying machine. There's actually a description of what this flying machine would have looked like. It had bat wings, a hot air balloon suspended above it to give it lift, and a parachute suspended beneath it so that the pilot could eject at any time if necessary. No real ale on the bar now, so I just went for a half a Guinness, which was fine. It seems to be all keg beers, mostly lagers. I think they may possibly have had what looked like a hand pump. Wasn't sure if it was a genuine hand pump or a keg dispenser for Doom Bar, but that had the badge turned around, was currently off. So possibly not a great draw for any real ale enthusiasts out there as a pub, but I do think this has quite a lot of nicely preserved late Victorian, early Edwardian interior features. So number 2 on today's itinerary, the Cricketers. This is a one-time coaching inn, and you can still see that in the layout of the building today. The main building has it's a largely 1790s sort of era rebuild. The main building has these large, quite Georgian style double height bay windows, and to the side is what is effectively the old stable block, and you can get a sense when you look at that in context of it more as a coaching inn. It has these large double doors that horses would have been led through to the stabling. The pub interior that we see today in the main bar, the stable block, is a later addition, but in the main bar area that dates to the 1880s, and we can in fact still see the name of the landlord at that time on the main 2 doors, the main entrance to the pub. R.W. Pitt, brandy merchant, and Robert William Pitt was the landlord from the 1880s all the way until the 1940s. The bar back has some original etched glass, and some of those signs date back to the 1880s. The Bonder of spirits, foreign brandies and choice brands, though some of the other parts are more recent. Towards the rear of the main bar there is a pair of timbered archways that divide 2 snug areas. The pub was originally known in the 1540s as the Last and Fish Cart. And last there is not the device for keeping a shoe in shape. It is in fact a measure of herring. I think it equates to an imperial thousand, sort of 1200 or 12,000 herring. In 1790, the pub was renamed to the Cricketers for no other reason that the landlord at the time was a fan of cricket. More or less an independent pub today. It's ran by a local small pub chain called the Golden Lion, I think, the Gold Lion pub company, who I believe own pubs predominantly in Brighton. They had, now that we're in Sussex of course, Harvey's Sussex Best on tap. Really nice interior. I like the sort of banquette seating around the outside walls of the main bar room. It creates a sort of a gallery effect almost for people sitting on the outside to look inwards into the bar to watch people passing by. A quick hi to Martin, who recognised me from the channel in there. That's a weird experience, but nice guy, Martin and his other half, having their lunch there in the Cricketers Arms. So hi, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Next, number 3 on today's itinerary, the Pump House. Cheers from the Pump House. This has a very Georgian feeling to the exterior, with these 2 large bay-fronted windows. Historic England have listed this building and believe that the building probably dates to the late 18th or early 19th century. However, the interior is largely 1950s. The name Pump House has been applied to a building on this site going back to the 1770s, and is probably a reference to the fact that the town well once stood opposite here. There is wood panelling that goes all the way from floor to ceiling in the main bar room. In amongst that wood panelling there are fluted pilasters and toothed and diamond lozenge decoration, according to the Historic England listing. I also rather like the stout fluted columns that go around the bar supporting the gantry, and that curved bar is apparently 1950s again. And that goes almost all the way around, more or less an island bar. It goes completely all the way around in 360 degrees. Also of note are the fireplaces, in particular the one on the left hand side as you enter the pub. It has the initials ME carved into it, which apparently stands for Miss Elliot, not to be confused with Missy Elliott, the hip-hop star. This was a owner of the building in the 1760s, Miss Elliott. It's a Nicholson's pub today, but they do have local beer, Harvey's Sussex Best on tap, so I approve in that regard. Not a lot else actually working on the hand pumps. I mean, you know, great for me. I love Harvey's Sussex Best and will always choose that over and above just about anything, but again, not perhaps a great pub if you are looking for a really interesting selection of real ales other than this wonderful stuff. Pub number 4, the Druid's Head. Hadn't originally intended to include this on the itinerary, but I've been here before and I think it's got some sort of character to it. Cheers from the Druid's Head. Quite possibly a pub that dates to 1830, although there are some indications inside that it has some history going back to 1510, despite being, as far as I can tell, not listed by Historic England. I do think the building has some merit to it. It's a mixture of brick and, I believe, flint rubble, has flint dressing on the outside and some timber framing on the inside. So some of those internal walls are really quite attractive with that mixture of flint rubble and timber. According to the pub website, the pub takes its name from a Druid stone circle that was at one time nearby. Also a bit of pub bingo time. There are apparently secret tunnels linking the pub to the shore for some reason, possibly used by smugglers at some point. So goes the legend. It is, of course, also reputedly haunted. More pub bingo time. I feel I'm being a bit unfair. On the Druid's Head, prior to this visit, this has always been one of my favourite pubs actually in Brighton. And partly just I like the name, I like the sort of very vernacular, I believe, Sussex architecture. There aren't a lot of flint-fronted pubs in Brighton, certainly not on this particular list that we're covering today. So it feels like a very traditional Sussex type of building, though alas there is quite a fair liberal use of gastropub paint on the interior today. But you know, try and screw your eyes up and ignore that. Look to the walls with the flint rubble and timber and you may well still have a good time. It's a Green King pub today. Unfortunately, all of the hand pumps were off. They had some technical problem. So once again, I've had to resort to Guinness. It's fine, it's all right. Next is this number 4, slightly losing track, the Victory. Cheers from the Victory. Initially, the most striking feature of this pub, of course, these light and dark green striped tiles on the exterior, glazed ceramic tiles. They probably date to the late 1800s, early 1900s. Quite elaborate work over each of the entrances as well. To quote from Historic England's listing, they have scrolled cornices, overlights and panelled and glazed double doors. There is engraved glass all around, not just the windows but also the doors, the two entrances there, and they both show the name of the pub, Victory Inn, but also the offering, wines and spirits, and mark some of the different bar areas therein. The bar back is apparently late 19th century, although I assume the clock therein is a bit more modern than that. The bar front is of a roughly similar age, possibly 1910. There's a rather fine looking fireplace in the saloon bar with ionic columns flanking it. The main bar room also has a lincruster ceiling, which is likely contemporary with a lot of the rest of the interior. It still bears the logo of Tamplin's Brewery, and they were a Brighton-based brewery founded in 1821. And at one time they owned in excess of 100 pubs around Brighton. It is of course named for Nelson's flagship, as used at the Battle of Trafalgar in 1810. Wonderfully, it still exists today and is in dry dock now as a museum ship at Portsmouth Harbour. This is another pub in Brighton today that is operated by a small local pub co. They're called the Lane Pub Company, so it's more or less an independent pub for all intents and purposes. It's certainly not a national pub chain. The beer I'm drinking here is from 360 Degrees Brewery, and it's a Sussex Best, which is nice to see a different Sussex Best rather than the usual Harvey's. Can't say I'm quite as fond of it as I am of Harvey's, but it's certainly a, it's a decent bitter, I would say. Pub number 6. Alas, we're not really seeing this at its best. If I walk out this way a little bit, you can see there is currently some construction work going on here. The Colonnade Bar and the neighbouring Theatre Royal in Brighton. So it has a very attractive frontage. You'll just have to take my word for it, but we're not really going to see that in its best light today. But perhaps we can still appreciate the interior. It is still, I'm reassured, open for business as usual. I couldn't do the talky bits about the Colonnade Bar actually in situ because it would just have ruined the atmosphere. There were two old gents there trying to enjoy a quiet pint and they didn't want an idiot sitting in the corner talking about pub history. The name comes from the fact that there is in fact a colonnade in front, hard to see given the current renovation works. One small piece of the frontage that we can at least enjoy, the fine coloured tiles to the right of the entrance, and I believe there are also some opposite. And they have the original name, the Colonnade Hotel of the pub therein. If you look at older photos of the pub, you'll see that there is a little mannequin in the bay window at the front. I believe that chap was named Willie, but it seems he's either been temporarily or permanently removed, possibly related to the current refurb. The bar back is Victorian, 3-bay. The bar counter has a sort of velvet covering on the panels, giving a luxuriant feel befitting of a theatre bar. Quite a handsome plaster ceiling with some fine mouldings on it. In the 1890s, the pub was remodelled, and much of the interior that we see today survives from that time. I found an interesting old newspaper article that the prior photos that had been hung in the pub were being sold en masse ahead of that 1890s refurbishment. They're photos of eminent artistes of the last 40 years, so perhaps they were thought no longer relevant in the forward-looking 1890s. Pub number 7, and I've saved Brighton's possibly showiest pub, a splendid example of mock Tudor until last. This is the King and Queen. Cheers from the King and Queen. This pub is absolutely mock Tudor, sometimes known as Brewer's Tudor on steroids. Never seen such an exuberant example of that on the exterior. I'm not sure what the collective noun is for gables, but it certainly has an abundance of them. It has half timbered upper floors, very much mock Tudor motif, dressings of stone going to the ground floor. There's a double gable on the right hand side, which is quite an unusual feature. Above the door there are statues of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn welcoming you in, and there's also plasterwork of the King and Queen there beneath one of the other gables of the pub, which is slightly misleading because the pub is not named after Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. It's in fact named after King George III and his wife Queen Charlotte. Most sources cite the origin of the pub as 1779, when it was converted from a farmhouse, and the current mock Tudor edifice that we see today is a rebuild of around 1931. It was at one time used as Brighton's corn exchange, although that eventually moved in around 1868, I believe, to the Brighton Dome, part of the Royal Pavilion estate. And you can still see some evidence of its signage there today. Inside it evokes a sort of baronial vast Tudor hall, and it's even more cavernous than prior examples of mock Tudor that have been featured on the channel. It dwarfs in scale, it gems like the city of York. There was formerly a screen dividing the two main bar areas, but as is the way of the 1960s when they were all for bland open plan interiors, that was removed at that time. However, that aside, much of the interior is consistent with how it would have looked from that early 1930s rebuild, even though it is nowadays festooned with more modern paraphernalia like large screens for showing sports and things like fruit machines, pinball machines, pool tables and so on. There is so much ornamentation in this pub that it is impossible to list it all, and so much that evokes that sense of merry England, including stained glass, carved wood, tiles. One of my favourite features, which unfortunately on my visit was inaccessible, was the Minstrel's Gallery. There's a small seating area above the bar. There are other raised areas. There's another first floor bar area called Prinny's Bar, and that also gives a great vantage point to look down over the rest of that mock Tudor splendour. Consistent with several pubs on today's tour of Brighton, all of the hand pumps were off, so there was no real ale offering today. In fairness to Brighton, we are in possibly that difficult period of the year between Christmas and New Year, when probably the stocks have been exhausted in the run to Christmas, and they're struggling to replenish them with the difficult availability of breweries in this sort of strange interregnum part of the calendar. So I'm having from the taps. Harvey's apparently make a a lager. Who knew? Not really much of a lager drinker generally, but that's all right. It's what does it say? Russian hops or something like that. But it's nice and dry and bitter and not really sweet, so it's all right. Okay, well, that is it from today's tour of Brighton. I hope that's been interesting and of some value. I do think it's a city that has a pretty good concentration of fairly well preserved pubs, even if from a real ale point of view today it was perhaps a tiny bit disappointing. There's a lot of as I say, it was maybe because we're in that funny bit in between Christmas and New Year. So anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.